For years, all the world saw was a young prince's cute face. However, there was a haunting silence behind the royal gates. Servants whispered. In the middle of the night, Nanny left. The royal illusion was broken barely a minute ago by a palace psychologist who revealed something so destructive that it could change the future of the monarchy. What has been concealed from view as well as why? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve deeper into the true implications of this for the royal family. Prince Louis appeared to be the epitome of young charm at first impression, smiling for photographers, pulling playfully at his mother's clothes and waving from balconies. However, something darker was simmering inside the royal walls while the populace was enamored with his antics. Couriers discussed strange outbursts in whispers. Close associates of Louis started to surreptitiously leave their jobs, albeit behind closed doors, for personal reasons. Their faces conveyed a different message. They were frightened to talk, uneasy, and haunted. Louis would weep for hours on end on certain evenings. According to a former royal nanny who wished to remain anonymous, no consolation could calm him, she remarked in a trembling voice. He wasn't throwing tantrums. He seemed to be absorbed in his own thoughts. At the time, her remarks were disregarded and buried under layers of denial and bureaucracy. She wasn't alone, though. Insiders started pointing out that Louis frequently and inexplicably missed important royal appearances. In contrast to George or Charlotte, whose attendance at occasions was meticulously prepared and coordinated, Louis' involvement was inconsistent. He would either be late or not show up at all. When he did show there, handlers were uncharacteristically close, talking, diverting, and rooting him all the time. What precisely were they concealing? Behavioral specialists have become fixated on footage from recent events, particularly the Jubilee. They've started examining each blink and each faint flinch. One remarkable feature was Louis' total emotional disengagement during thunderous applause, which was followed by abrupt, startling, and apparently practiced laughter. According to one expert, this is not usual child behavior. It implies either concealing or emotional overstimulation, or perhaps both. The media's silence was even more unsettling. Televised broadcasts stopped reporting on Louis' actions. Inexplicably, paparazzi images, typically brutal in their hunt for royal children, were not released. A number of reporters now attest that the royal liaison strongly advised them not to write anything that may distort Louis' emotional state. A gag order disguised in terms of public relations. According to reports, the royal family sought the help of an independent specialist behind the scenes who could work without being watched by the media. Here comes Dr. K, a psychologist who is well known for managing well-known child situations in extremely private settings. Her participation was never intended to be made public. Under the pretense of being an educational consultant, she was subtly introduced. Her true purpose, however, was much more important. Dr. K observed Louis for weeks. Not just his behavior in public, but also his private life, habits, anxieties, and relationships with family. Insiders say she was shaken by what she discovered. Louis was obviously unprotected by a system that prioritized image above intervention, not because he was ill. The palace believed that her presence would bring about a calm resolution. However, Dr. K wasn't here to keep people's illusions alive. Her purpose was to be honest. However, the diagnosis was just the start. The events that transpired within the royal residence were much more terrifying than anyone could have predicted. Each smile concealed a more profound tale. Each wave was practiced. Furthermore, the truth was concealed in plain view. Experts in body language now think that the indicators were always present. From fidgeting hands to empty staircases. Why didn't the palace take action sooner then? Or were they already aware? Prince Louis's appearance was planned out from the minute he entered the spotlight at Wimbledon. Louis was sometimes observed writhing, hiding his ears, or gazing into space, whereas George and Charlotte clapped courteously and obeyed instructions. The youngest royal was observed making crazy gestures, sticking out his tongue, or turning away from the audience at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. It was dismissed by the public as childish mischief. However, something was obviously falling apart underneath the laughing. Observers now feel that these were silent pleas for assistance rather than indications of misconduct. Louis appeared to float in and out of the scene in contrast to his siblings. Louis was frequently either eerily still or hyperanimated during the balcony presentations where Charlotte curtsied gracefully and George stood erect. It was a stark contrast. George seemed intent, Charlotte calm. However, Louis felt alienated, remote, and adrift in a world that few people seemed to comprehend. Later, palace sources acknowledged that there had been persistent worries about Louis' reactions to abrupt bursts of light, erratic crowds, and loud noises. Although he displayed odd looks to the audience, aides privately described himself as overwhelmed and occasionally absolutely frozen during rehearsals. There have been rumors of Louise having tantrums before events, and that she would only consent to go if certain comfort measures were taken. Although it was never intended, these moments nearly made it to the outer world. Hot MIC recordings have repeatedly caught eerie backstage conversations between royal assistants. A tech heard a handler say, "Just keep him smiling." During one interaction, another said, "Take him off the stage if he stays again. This cannot continue. He isn't treated fairly." These comments were never broadcast. They cut the feeds. The video vanished. However, the tension was growing. Even the royal press staff was starting to feel concerned by this point. Between those committed to uphold the monarchy's reputation and those who were desperate to keep the boys safe, a silent revolt was growing. Reporters started to put more pressure on them. According to reports, one person was informed, "This is not your issue. It's all right." However, they all knew in their hearts that Louis wasn't okay. The act was also getting old. Medical assistants were also becoming irritated. They called for longer intervals between events, fewer public appearances, and more accommodations. But an organization that was committed to maintaining continuity and strength at all costs drowned out their voices. "The firm does not know how to deal with vulnerability," one aide stated, "especially when it wears a crown." According to experts, Louis' royal handlers attempted to control him in real time by employing deceptive tactics to divert his attention during public appearances, directing his hands into a wave, tapping his shoulder, and whispering in his ear. These nudges weren't mild. These performances were designed to conceal a developing problem. But there was still no sound in the palace. Louis, imprisoned in a golden cage, kept performing as the world looked on in ignorance. And one voice broke the decorum just when everyone assumed the palace would step in discreetly. She was the last chance for the palace. She is now its most dangerous whistleblower, though. Dr. K, the psychologist assigned to guard the youngest prince of the monarchy, took an unexpected turn and performed the unimaginable. She made her public. In addition to being clinical, her statements were devastating and revealed a system based on emotional deprivation, denial, and secrecy. Dr. K wasn't your typical advisor. She had worked with some of the most complicated childhood trauma cases in well-known families worldwide for more than 20 years. When rumors concerning Prince Louis could no longer be denied, she was the ideal candidate due to her reputation for secrecy, accuracy, and aggressive campaigning. She entered the palace as a lifeline rather than a critic thanks to a rigorous confidentiality agreement and royal-level security clearance. Her meetings with Louis were supposed to be quick, standard evaluations that would only be sufficient to allay her inner fears. However, what started off as ordinary observations swiftly turned into something more sinister. Leaked sources close to the Psychologist claim that Louis' speech was not that of a carefree child. He talked softly like if he were drowning. He reportedly questioned, "Why do I have to smile when I'm scared?" At one session, a question that deeply unsettled Dr. K. He talked about feeling confined to noisy spaces, perplexed as to why he was required to appear in front of cameras and uncertain about what was performance and what was reality. "They only see me when I'm happy," he reportedly said, expressing a sense of invisibility. These were not outbursts. These were early indicators that a child was experiencing emotional difficulties. But instead of supporting him, the organization pushed for normalcy. Concerned about the seriousness of what she was seeing, Dr. K begged high palace officials to limit Louis' public visibility. She maintained that rather than more picture opportunities, rehearsals, or briefings, the boy required expert clinical support. However, she encountered deflection each time she sounded the alert. She was informed that the public needed to see a united, joyful front and that the family couldn't afford to speculate. Weeks went by. The sessions became more intense. Once vivacious and intermittent, Louis' disposition changed to times of quiet and obvious retreat. He averted his gaze. "I want to go somewhere quiet. But there's always a camera," he allegedly muttered during one session. That was when Dr. K made the decision. She was no longer able to be complicit. The palace believed her resignation was silent and quick. Within hours, a copy of her final internal report was leaked to a global child mental health network who promptly identified it as a demand for institutional accountability, not to rival royals or tabloids. The report highlighted a pattern of systemic neglect, emotional mishandling, and an unsettling preference for appearance over a child's well. The purpose of Dr. K's revelation was not retaliation. It was a protective gesture, but it broke the carefully cultivated illusion of the palace. A royal scandal that had nothing to do with affairs or money occurred for the first time in decades. Something much more damaging was at issue. The inner anguish of a youngster who has been muted by obligation. However, what was stated in that report, and why is the castle completely under lockdown? Even while the report's language was clinical, the crushing weight it carried was not. The media's favorite cheeky royal, Prince Louis, was suffering from an illness that could alter everything. For the whole line of succession, not just for him. The discovery of a rare neurological emotional disorder which was not named for privacy reasons but had serious implications that astonished even seasoned doctors was concealed deep within Dr. Cassie's leaked report. The paper claims that Louise displayed recurrent patterns of social disengagement, increased susceptibility to stimuli, and unexpectedly strong emotional reactions. Put more simply, he was having a hard time processing all that was happening to him, and the royal realm was the most taxing stage of all. Despite not being categorized as a handicap, the condition was defined as developmentally unusual. In controlled environments, Louis was articulate and academically brilliant. But when under stress, particularly the performance demand of royal life, his reactions were erratic. He might be composed one minute, then lose it the next. The flare of a camera flash or a simple cheer from the audience could cause an emotional overload or a silent shutdown. The report was clear-cut. Every time the prince was thrown into the spotlight, he was functioning at a high level but under tremendous psychological strain. Dr. K's assessment was not made hastily. She described her procedure in great detail, pointing out that although Louis had exceptional resilience, his neurological profile necessitated structured situations and sustained emotional care. He needed to feel protected. Yet the very framework of royal life, its practices, appearances, and expectations was in direct opposition to that. According to the report, public performance serves as an accelerant, causing his symptoms to worsen quickly. One statement hidden on page 14 was possibly the most damning of them. It now reverberates like a premonition across royal halls. If left unchecked, this can develop into a crisis of identity that has constitutional ramifications. It wasn't merely a caution. A centuries-old organization fixated on ancestry, poise, and the appearance of perfection was flagged because this wasn't just about a kid who was silently battling. It concerned the possible disintegration of the position of a future king. In addition to blood, the line of succession is based on perceived stability and strength. What occurs if the youngest heir, who was once endearingly erratic, turns out to be subtly failing? When one of its members no longer fits the pattern yet, is still prevented from breaking free, how can a monarchy adjust? Here was a chance for empathy, openness, and the monarchy to take the initiative and lead with integrity. However, they didn't take that route. Nevertheless, the palace opted for power above empathy, starting a response that was even more terrifying than the diagnosis. Despite the fact that the diagnosis was confidential, the palace's response was everything but a deliberate attempt to alter Prince Lou's reality as suggested by leaked emails, media blackouts, and meticulously staged images. The royals were already rewriting the story with brutal accuracy as Dr. K's report circulated behind closed doors. Kensington Palace went into overdrive within hours of the reports being leaked. The plan was obvious. Cover the reality with carefully chosen grins. All of a sudden, Louis was everywhere. He was clutching Catherine's hand during family walks, laughing in casual, candid photos, and smiling in the gardens with his siblings. However, these weren't impromptu events. All of the pictures and frames were staged. Whole scenes were arranged with press photographers under non-disclosure agreements. According to several sources presently in existence, there was a reason for the timing. It was choreography for a crisis. Tabloid sources started speculating about a blackout pact behind the scenes. Palace officials allegedly called major media outlets to request that they tone down their coverage. In return for keeping quiet about Louis' illness, editors were supposedly given early access to royal scoops. In a matter of days, the internet was overrun with fluff rather than worry. The funniest faces of Prince Lou. Once more, the royal miscreant strikes. Headlines intended to disarm, divert, and obscure the truth. And this is where the story takes an even darker turn. Because if what Dr. K revealed is even partially true, then this isn't just about a young prince struggling behind palace walls. It's about a centuries-old institution choosing image over a child's well-being. The question now is no longer what is happening to Prince Louis. The real question is how far will the palace go to keep the truth buried? Will the monarchy finally change? Or will silence continue to protect power at any cost? One thing is certain, this story is far from over. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next because the next revelation could change or not.